Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you joining us from around the world. I'm Yining Zhao from International Telecommunication Union (ITU), and I'm delighted to serve as your Master of Ceremonies for today's webinar. This special event is held in celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2025. It is co-organized by ITU and Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona as part of the ITU Digital Transformation Dialogues. Today's webinar highlights the progress of digital inclusion and the accessibility track. This track is a key part of the global initiative on virtual worlds and AI, discovering the citiverse, launched by ITU, UNICC, and Digital Dubai. Today, we celebrate accessibility is not as a technical feature, but as a fundamental right, a cornerstone for building inclusive digital societies and virtual worlds that truly serve everyone. Before we introduce our esteemed speakers, let's go over a few important housekeeping rules. First, audience questions will be addressed during the Q&A session. If you would like to submit a question, please type it into the Q&A window, which you can access via the icon at the bottom of your screen. When submitting your questions, kindly also indicate which speaker your question is directed to. We will do our best to address as many questions as time allows. Additionally, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the event website afterwards. To officially open today's event, it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Seizo Onoe, Director of the Telecommunication Standardization Bureau at ITU. He has kindly shared a video message with us. I would like to now to invite my colleague to play the video. It seems we are having some technical issues. Mm.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all joining us from around the world. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this special celebration of Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2025, co-organized by the International Telecommunication Union, Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. Today, we gather not only to raise awareness, but to ignite action. As we look to the future, the question is not whether our cities will become digital. That future is already here. The real question is how we ensure that the digital transformation leads to inclusion, not exclusion, equity, not division, empowerment, not alienation. This is why the Digital Inclusion and Accessibility track within the Global Initiative on Virtual World and AI, discovering the citiverse is so important. The initiative serves as a global platform that aims at fostering open, interoperable, and innovative AI-powered virtual worlds that can be used safely and with confidence by people, businesses, and public services. Together, we are building more than just digital infrastructure. We are laying the foundations for an inclusive citiverse by design. A citiverse where every voice can be heard, every person can participate, and every barrier can be broken. We stand at a pivotal moment, states are embracing virtual worlds, AI, and immersive technologies faster than ever before. But as we innovate, we must never leave anyone behind. Accessibility is not a feature, it is a fundamental need. It must be built in from the start, not added as an afterthought. That is why this initiative, guided by SDG 10 on reducing inequalities and SDG 11 on sustainable cities, is working to define global guidelines that place inclusion at the heart of digital transformation. These guidelines are being shared by experts, communities, and innovators worldwide. And today, we have the opportunity to learn from each other, to listen deeply, and to commit to a shared vision, a future where technology doesn't just serve the few, but empowers all. Let this Global Accessibility Awareness Day be a reminder and a rallying call, a call to shape virtual worlds that reflect the richness of our real-world diversity, a call to build technologies that open doors rather than close them. Together, we can and we will build a citiverse that is inclusive, empowering, and truly for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you to Mr. Onoi for sharing this inspiring video message. We now begin with session one, digital inclusion and accessibility, stakeholders and accessibility services. I'm pleased to invite our moderator for this session, Dr. Yongjik Lee, Managing Director of the Center for Accessible ICT in Korea and Rapporteur for ITUT Study Group 20, Question 8 on human-centric digital services enabled by IoT and smart sustainable cities and communities related to digital health, accessibility, and inclusion. Dr. Lee, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rini. Good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all participants joining us from around the world. Welcome all. My name is Yongjik Lee, and I'm delighted to moderate this important session on digital inclusion and accessibility, stakeholders and accessibility services. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, represent a vital global commitment to building inclusive and equitable societies for persons with disabilities and other vulnerable populations. One of the most fundamental principles of the SDGs is to ensure that no one is left behind. This calls for an inclusive approach that embraces persons with disabilities, women, children, older persons, migrants, and people living in poverty, among others. Last year, I had the privilege of participating in the ITUT focus group on metaverse, where I served as a co-chair of the task group on accessibility and inclusion. Over the 1.5 years, we studied the possibilities of virtual world technologies such as the metaverse or citiverse, which can offer transformative new opportunities for persons with disabilities and other vulnerable communities. However, we learned that opportunities like these do not rise automatically. They must be carefully planned and intentionally designed. Without inclusive design and thoughtful consideration, virtual environments could become yet another barrier, leaving many individuals behind. In this context, the topic presented by our three speakers today are especially important and timely. Through this session, we will explore stakeholder analysis and accessibility-related service necessary to build inclusive virtual worlds that truly serves everyone. Let me now briefly introduce our speakers for this session. We have three speakers. Professor Christoph Kretz is an associate professor of psychology at SWPS University in Warsaw, Poland, where he's heading the Eye Tracking Research Center. His research and teaching interests include the inclusions and accessibility technologies, human-computer interactions and usability research, visual attention and its dynamics, eye tracking methods and statistics, and multimedia learning. According to Scholar GPS, Christoph Kretz is in the top 0.5% of scholars in the eye tracking field. Our next speaker, Professor Paola Cecchi Di Meglio, Faculty Chair of the Executive Leadership Research Initiative for Women and Minority Attorneys at Harvard University, whose work spans inclusion, innovation, and leadership. Last year, she also served as a co-chair of the task group on accessibility and inclusion within the ITUT focus group on metaverse with me. She is globally recognized expert in AI, big data, behavioral science, and talent analytics. Our last speaker, Dr. Sarah Ann McDonough, is the postdoctoral researcher at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona and a member of Transmedia Catalonia Research Group. Our research focuses on media accessibility, cultural heritage, sustainability, and artificial intelligence with particular interest in contested digital heritage and intersections between sustainability, accessibility, and AI. I now like to invite each of our speakers to deliver their presentations. Each speaker will have up to 15 minutes. Let us begin with Professor Christoph Kretz. Professor Kretz, the floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to my talk on the cognitive psychology perspective on accessibility. I will share my slides in a second. I'll try to be as brief as possible. I hope everyone can see my slides properly. So the title is Accessibility for All. It's a bit controversial title because from the cognitive psychology perspective, I want to make a point that accessibility features are beneficial for everyone, regardless we struggle with any disabilities or not. Let me start with this famous quote from Sir Tim Berners-Lee. The power of the web is in its universality. Access by everyone is an essential aspect of it. We know already that access to information communication is super important. It is also the human right. It has also the positive societal impact, building equal opportunities for everyone, like we heard twice already today, leaving no one behind. There are also legal and ethical responsibilities. For example, such acts like American with Disabilities Act or European Accessibility Act, which is turning into life this year for every European EU country. But the real point of today's talk is that accessibility features might improve user experience for everyone. So the basic motivation for this research and the background is that during the literature review, we found several papers and research on how the web accessibility can improve the user experience for individuals without any disability. But no one actually examined the cognitive engagement features of the contact with digital media for people without disabilities. So we really dive into this topic, and we started with this quite common observation, quite trivial one, that digital media constantly fights for our attention. They bombard us with trillions of information and millions of new flashing spots where they want to drag our attention and keep our attention. But this bombarding actually have the opposite effect, that it's so hard to focus on anything particular because the real information acquisition, cognitive acquisition, requires focal attentive processing for a relatively long time. When I talk about the long time in terms of digital media, I talk about minutes, not hours. So we are at this time schedule. Talking about the cognitive engagement, it has well-established neurological roots, because when we start talking about what does the cognitive processing mean, so we see very different, interconnected but still different neurological pathways in our brain when any information gets into your visual cortex, which is on the back side of the brain. It first goes with the dorsal pathway when we quickly realize what's all around on the screen or around us, and if we are in the virtual world. And then we can focus on something more specific, more local information, going to the bottom ventral pathway, focusing, meaning also deeper processing the information, which leads to better understanding and better memory. So this focal attention is somehow necessary for understanding and memorization. How we can research that, and it appears that we can quite easily get into how people process cognitively information by looking into their eyes. So when I record the eyes for the few seconds of the first moment when you look on the website, those green dots will represent your eye fixations for milliseconds, like quickly orienting what's all around on the screen, and then focus with these bigger dot circles. You see the purple one, meaning that at that moment you can actually, our brain is actually processing deeply the information, which we actually see. That can be quite easily researched and also somehow guessed from quite a new model which we developed in our lab, meaning the coefficient K, which you see the simple formula on the right. But nevertheless, what we did, we actually invited 20 participants to our eye tracking lab, where we presented them websites, news portals, which are actually known for being quite good in implementing accessibility features. Websites like the New York Times or BBC portals. But anyway, we tried to improve them, having in mind two types of enhancements for low vision enhancements and enhancements for cognitive impairments. So let's call them cognitive accessibility features. It always can be improved. So we improved those websites and presented to participants, and somehow compared to how they look on the websites as they are now, without any improvements. While people were navigating the websites, we tracked the eyes and had several eye movement metrics, like K coefficient mentioned already, number of fixations or total fixation time. And we also recorded the heartbeats of participants, which is kind of a good indicator of cognitive engagement, and skin conductance. And we did not forget to ask subjective questions about the readability and comprehension of the presented websites. It looked more or less like this. The session, people were tasked to find and read an article on the website, and they knew that we're going to ask 3 questions. Questions about the comprehension, and a question about the understandability and readability for a short time. The web page presentation was for 1 minute only, 60 seconds, no longer. What we have found that enhancing the websites with cognitive accessibility features leads to subjective evaluation of those websites as being more understandable. That's how people took those websites. Those websites which were enhanced with low vision features, they were evaluated as being more readable. Not surprising result, quite a nice one, but still was a check of our experimental manipulation. But what's more interesting, that we actually demonstrated that looking into the eyes, we see that those websites which were enhanced, they led to more focal attention of the users, meaning that probably the information people get from those media were deeper processed and could be understood more correctly. That's not enough for us. So because the attention is a process, so we wanted to look into the time of contact with this digital content, and when looking at on the time scale on the axis, on the horizontal axis, you see the beginning and ending times for contact with this digital content. What we really found out here, what's the most important aspect of or conclusion from this graph is that although we see the loss of attention over the time when people read the websites, over 1 minute, I remind. But when the website is enhanced with cognitive accessibility features, this loss is not significant. And at the end, people can stay still in their focal mode of attention. That was somehow striking for me. And I thought, wow, it's really amazing. And I do remember that we have 20 participants not suffering any disabilities. Those were regular psychology students of our university. So take-home messages are actually 3 points I would like to stress here, that we see experimentally demonstrated the loss of attention over time in contact with the digital media, and this loss is quite significant. But when we enhance websites, when we enhance the content with cognitive accessibility features, we might keep the attention of the user focal for much longer time until the end of the contact with the media. It can build massive business opportunities for those who produce the content and provide the media. It's not enough. It's not all. We also demonstrated in this research that this accessibility, cognitive accessibility enhancements, they are beneficial not only for everyone in our study, but also for those people who actually have super high cognitive resources when they enter the lab. So those, because we measured that and we know that there were some people who were really high in their cognitive resources, they actually benefited a lot from accessibility features, from cognitive accessibility features. And that's actually is, from my perspective, quite optimistic outcome of this study, because it's not only about not leaving anyone behind, but it's also we somehow demonstrate that accessibility features is a must for everyone, or is beneficial for engaging the every user. So we really want to stress this out, that when you think about the accessibility from the beginning, when designing the digital content, you benefit all the users and you keep them more focal for much longer time. You keep them more engaged in your media. That's somehow our point. I would like to leave you with, and I would like to appreciate the team which is behind the study: Marta Akin, Isabella Grace, Professor Carlos Duarte, and Marcus Queenie and Leticia Pereira. Quite international team. between Poland, Ireland, and Portugal. Thank you so much, and I would be happy to take some questions now when it's time for this.
Thank you, Professor Kretz, for those valuable insights. I will follow up with you after everyone's presentation with some questions. All right, thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Paula Cecchi-Dimitriou. Paula, please go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us wherever you are. I know for myself, it's quite very early in the morning. So let me present you what we will be discussing in the next 10 minutes, which is about building an inclusive citiverse and the various stakeholders and collaboration that are necessary to make that happen. First and foremost, I do think that is important to stress of the importance of this initiative that we are part of at ITU, which is about that global initiative on virtual world and AI, discovering the citiverse. Why? Because this is an opportunity from experts from around, I will say, field of area such as in psychology or in law or in economy or in cybersecurity to join the conversation and create a future that will be accessible for all. And I will echo what my previous panelist speaker, Kretz, have said. Accessibility is necessary for all of us. I just want to remind us that one day we may need glasses, or one day we may need hearing aid. And this is not just something that will be beneficial for some group, that will be beneficial for all, because that creates intergenerational collaboration about bringing information, about bringing a future where all will benefit. So let me dive into the various stakeholders that are necessary to make the future beneficial for all. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. So why inclusion and accessibility matter in the citiverse? First, the citiverse is a digital layer of our physical urban life. And we should not forget that the citiverse is and the metaverse, virtual world, multiverse, as you wish to call it, is probably something that in the next 10 to 20 years, we will be looking at similar to what phone was to us 20 years ago, meaning that it will be part of our life and we could not imagine living without it. It will certainly transform how we live, how we move, how we work, and how we access service, even as how we're going to provide work around the world. There is no physical boundary that will tie up to talent around the world. And inclusion and accessibility must be at the core and should not be an afterthought. I think we are realizing now that sometimes design of product or services did not include right away individual that should have been part of the conversation and have led, I will say, on both sides of the equation, an increased cost for the person or the company producing that services and product, such as government or company offering transport, meaning rethinking the design of access is something that is extremely costly. And on the other hand, for the person or the user using those services, not being able to access and going everywhere as they wish to do because of physical or cognitive being differently able is something that should not be possible. And I'm saying that because when you think about city, wherever you go around the world, when you have, for example, some physical impairment, you quickly realize the boundary of not being able to take public transportation because there is not an elevator. Or when you have a physical impairment, not having an ability to hear certain sound guiding you through the city. This is where the citiverse will change, I believe, with a virtual world, the accessibility for all. The stakeholder collaboration in that vein is necessary and essential and must be multidisciplinary, meaning it has to be coming from all around the corner of science, knowledge, and expertise. It cannot be created in silo by only one group. Thank you. Can I have the next slide? And that's, I will say, the four category of stakeholders that we can identify in that ecosystem overview. Bearing in mind that the multiverse, virtual world and metaverse is something that is already affecting all the economic sector around the world. And if we were to divide the key stakeholders, maybe I will say too simplistically, but also bearing in mind that this is not an exhaustive list, but a logical classification of an extremely complex system. But I will say those four key stakeholders are really the cornerstone of the understanding of creating an inclusive cityverse. So the first one I will say are the public sector and the governance. The second one are the private sector and technology provider. The third one are the community and the civil society. And the fourth one are the academic and standardization stakeholder. Each of them have very specific role who are necessary for each other to be the springboard of something that is truly inclusive and accessible. Next slide, please. Now, let me dive into the first two stakeholders. So the public sector and the governance. Think about the city government, urban planner, and regulator, including government being part of those initiatives. The key role that they have is really to help set policy and digital framework, ensuring that accessibility is asked from the outset and that all the stakeholders in the ecosystem are thinking about accessibility in their product, in their service, in the way in which they will design something that do not exist yet or already is existing and may not have included this feature. It is a key actor, I will say key node in coordinating cross-sector collaboration because they are the ones who are capable of helping investing in the broadband of equity and digital literacy across all the layers of society. They are, I would say, an act as regulator and enabler, and they really have one key role, coordinating stakeholders' collaboration across sector, but also across region, as we should not forget that digital access is not equally distributed at the moment, and it is extremely important that no one is left behind and that those gaps are closed. The second key stakeholder is the private sector and the technology providers. So here, think about technology company, telecom provider, and startup who are driving innovation in this field. They really develop platform software, 5G, 6G infrastructure, and probably we will see up to 10G or even more in the future. All of those private sector actors are key in integrating, I will say, universal design principle and ensuring that affordability and diversity of user are included. Why? Because their innovation have to align absolutely with the public goal, but also with generally and that's where the SDG goal come in, thinking about a future for all, not just, I will say, in the future of the next 10 years or 100 years, but a longer term for the future generation. Next slide, please. And we have two more stakeholders. Those stakeholders are the community and civil society. They are the local resident. They are also the grassroots organization and the nonprofit in this area. They really represent how we live and what our experience of situation in, I will say, in the real world, but also in the virtual world. And they are there to advocate, I will say, for need, for example, of a multilingual interface across all the platform that we can use in the virtual world. They are also active participants in the co-design of what the future will look like, and they are the key actor monitoring and demanding accountability. They are really the one providing a critical insight for population who may be underserved, but also able to hold other stakeholders accountable for what the future should look like. And the last category, I will say, are the academic and standardization stakeholders. They are researcher, university, and standard organization who are really here to provide and generate evidence-based insight. For example, what my other panelists will present to you today, such as knowing what is the overflow of information having on an individual, and how do we make sure that information is reliable and we keep the spam of a user with accessibility being built in. They also create those benchmark and standard, such as the ITU or the W3C. And I strongly believe that university is a powerful source of creating the future of tomorrow. They are where we are providing information from all sides, so individual can create critical thinking and debate any type of issue that may come up, including what the citiverse will bring and how accessibility has to be included at the front end and why is it important. They are also an opportunity for the future leader to be exposed to interdisciplinary perspective from all kinds of knowledge. They really, I will say, the last stakeholders develop accessibility guideline and technical standard in building that future. Can I have the next slide? Thank you. I will say that the coordination, collaboration across those four key stakeholders, the public sector and the governance, the private sector and the technology provider, the community, civil society, and the academic and standardization stakeholders are all distinct and all play a key role in the ecosystem. And the success of the future really depend on their collaboration and a feedback loop to break down all the silo that may exist within one stakeholders or thinking and verticality of the knowledge. The commitment of the collaboration across all those actors is key. The ITU initiative on virtual world and AI is a perfect example of breaking down those barriers and making sure that collaboration and a feedback loop and the feedback loop and a commitment is all made together to really build a digital equity for all. Built by experts who are interdisciplinary and who think cross user experience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paula, for your enlightening presentation. Thank you. And again, I will get back to you with some questions at the Q&A segment. And now let's hear from Dr. Sarah N. McDonough. Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen so that you'll be able to see my presentation. 2 seconds. Okay. Can you see it okay? Can I have confirmation?
Yes, very
Yeah.
good.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much for the introduction, and I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank the ITU for the invitation today and for the chairs and the organizers of this session. I'm really happy to be here and to present something I worked on a while ago. So it's really nice to come back and to revisit some of the work that we covered in the ITU. Specifically, my presentation today, it's based on a technical report that we did as part of the Working Group 8 on Sustainability, Accessibility and Inclusion as part of the ITU focus group on the metaverse. And the technical report is on accessibility in a sustainable metaverse. So that's going to be the topic today. I want to discuss some of the ways in which we can promote the adoption of an integrated approach when we think of accessibility and sustainability within the metaverse. And I really want to highlight some of the challenges involved in this approach, but also the opportunities that it presents to us. So in terms of the presentation today, I've just structured it into 4 sections. So I'm going to present what the metaverse is for those of you who might not be familiar with it, although I'm sure there are many who are here today. Talk about the opportunities, the challenges, and then finish with some recommendations and call to action. So the metaverse, what does it actually mean? So the first time that the metaverse appeared as a word was in actually a science fiction book back in 1992. And in the novel, the metaverse was seen as this sort of virtual world that connected people, and it was also a digital escape from the real world. But now we see that the metaverse is actually a reality. So how it was defined within the ITU focus group on the metaverse was an integrative ecosystem of virtual worlds offering immersive experiences to users that modify pre-existing and create new value from economic, environmental, social, and cultural perspectives. So in terms of the technologies that actually support the metaverse, I want to walk you through a few of them today. And think of these really as the foundational blocks of what makes up the metaverse. So first of all, we have artificial intelligence. This is really the core technology, which enables machines to perform tasks independently without the need for a human. So within the metaverse itself, AI can allow for personalization. It can also tailor experiences and content to an individual. Alongside this, we have natural language processing, which is a branch of AI, and that's really crucial for facilitating real-time voice and text communication and translation between users. Next to this, we have Internet of Things. So this is to do with actually physical objects that are connected, such as smart communication, smart systems that can interact with virtual worlds. And then another really important technology within the metaverse is blockchain. And this core function really lies in providing secure and verifiable ownership and transactions. So in the context of the metaverse, blockchain will enable secure ownership of virtual goods. And it also allows for decentralization. So removing control from a single company or entity and allowing for open participation. Of course, we also have virtual realities, which is about creating immersive environments for users they can interact with. And we also have augmented reality, which is blending digital elements together with real world through devices such as mobile phones, glasses, headsets. So, of course, there are a lot more technologies that enable the metaverse, but these are some of the key ones and the foundational blocks that support the metaverse and make it really possible. So given our understanding of what the metaverse and the underlying technologies are, I think it's important to ask the question about what are some of the environmental and social impacts of the metaverse and the underlying technologies that support it. So when we think about opportunities, a well-designed metaverse genuinely has the potential to open up new ways to work, connect, and learn. We can work without the need to travel anywhere physically. It's about creating a truly connected digital space. And this is particularly relevant for people with disabilities who often face barriers to traditional employment. For example, if we take the figures taken from a UN flagship report on disability and development, we can see that globally, 27% of people with disabilities of working age are employed. And this is in contrast to 56% of people without disabilities of working age who are employed. And this contrast is even more pronounced in industrialized and post-industrialized countries. So we can see that virtual spaces like the metaverse offers new ways to work, connect, and learn remotely, and eliminates the need for actual physical travel. So less planes in the sky, less cars on the road. This is a positive, right? However, there are some challenges to this, because while the metaverse eliminates the need for physical travel, a significant trade-off lies in the substantial computational power that's actually needed to support the underlying technologies of the metaverse. So things like blockchain, AI. Research corroborates this. So for example, a study by Strobel and colleagues found that training Google's BERT language model generated the equivalent carbon emissions of a trans-American flight. So while these advancements, of course, have the benefits of improving our ability to work from and interact with from different locations in the world, they actually put strain on our energy consumption that puts us at risk of not being in line with the Paris Agreement targets around decarbonisation and advancing environmental goals. So with this in mind then, zooming out a little bit, the current development phase of the metaverse really is an opportunity for us to prioritise social justice through accessibility, inclusion, and sustainability. So thinking about these things together rather than in isolation. And with that in mind then, what are some of the key considerations for building a metaverse that dismantles rather than replicates the challenges, particularly for people with disabilities that they experience offline? So in terms of the report that we presented, we had some key recommendations. So a fundamental recommendation that we had is making sure that usability and accessibility is a default setting. So integrating best practice from the design stage, so including audio description, subtitles, interlingual translation, and making these standard features, making them integral to the metaverse and not just an add-on at the end. Another piece of advice or recommendations that we provided was avoiding duplication of content. Now, this is something where technology could be useful. So technology such as blockchain. So this can actually identify existing content to avoid redundancy. However, of course, it's important to weigh this against the substantial energy consumption associated with the use of blockchain technology. And one strategy maybe to address this that I talk about in the report is prioritizing alternative blockchain technologies. So one strategy is prioritizing consensus mechanisms, specifically proof of stake over proof of work. So the energy consumption of a proof of stake blockchain is lower than proof of work, as it does not depend on computational intensive mining for transaction authentication. Instead, proof of stake designates different validators to actually verify the transaction. So the takeaway is if you use blockchain, opt for a less energy intensive proof of stake. So this could minimize data storage and processing needs, as well as saving energy. And sticking with the idea of duplication as well, there also is the possibility to upcycle existing accessibility services. So reusing existing audio descriptions, for example, subtitles, or translating existing ones instead of creating new ones from scratch. Now moving on then to create simple user interfaces. So how does this help accessibility and sustainability? So, well, a well-structured interface really makes it much easier for screen readers to actually interpret the information more accurately. And then it also helps people with low literacy. Plus, it reduces the cognitive load for all users, making it less taxing. Also, using icons for navigation. also with alternative text, this can improve and speed up navigation for users. So they're spending less time searching, and they could save on energy in terms of their devices. And it's also useful for people with low literacy, and again, screen reader users. Okay, well then moving on to the final recommendations that we have. Of course, we want to prioritize building an energy efficient metaverse. So how do we do this? We do this in terms of making sure that we are using and developing clear interfaces and making sure that we are using AI that is green and energy efficient. In terms of recommendation 6, we want to find alternative file and media formats. This is quite interesting for us because we have, when we talk about something like instead of using video, let's say, we could use something called a scalable vector graphic. So that's an SVG, which is animation. So these are, unlike JPEG files or PNGs, which are based on pixels, SVGs are actually mathematically equations that are scalable. And this means you can scale up or down depending on the quality without losing the quality. And also the files themselves are smaller. Of course, also text descriptions are also going to be inherently accessible to people with screen readers. So, and they also have information embedded, which is not the case, which might not be the case in videos. Another interesting detail relates to using energy efficient AI, which is sometimes called green AI. And this circles back to our previous discussion around AI's energy costs. So by actively focusing on developing AI models that use less computational power, we can still get the benefits of AI for accessibility with like text to speech or speech to text or translation without getting the environmental price tag. And then the final piece of guidance that is included in this report then relates to, and really ties everything together, I feel, is actually creating intuitive design and using easy to understand language alternatives throughout the metaverse. And this obviously improves the user experience for everyone, including people with disabilities. And it also can help reduce the digital carbon footprint. How? By making the metaverse easy to access and navigate, people will spend less time on it. They might use less data needed to be transferred, less processing is needed overall. So clear communication and intuitive design aren't just nice things to have in terms of usability, they can also be part of the sustainability picture as well. So to close then, as a sort of call to action, I'd like to leave you with some questions to think about, and maybe we can discuss later. I think it's important for us to think about how we build the metaverse. Are we building a metaverse that with inclusion at its core, designing for diverse needs, clear navigation, easy to understand language from the very beginning? And also, how can we make our metaverse more sustainable by reusing content, choosing efficient formats, and optimizing for older devices and slower connections? And then finally, are we prioritizing energy efficient technologies like green AI to reduce the environmental impact for accessibility tools and digital experiences? So that is all for me today. I'd really like to acknowledge the work and the team that I'm part of in UAB, in Transmedia Catalonia, and also the work and research that I've been doing on sustainability and accessibility as part of Clear Climate. And thank you very much. My email is there, and I look forward to your questions. And I will stop sharing the screen now. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for that presentation. As promised, we will now move to our Q&A segment. I will begin by posing one question to each of our speakers, but we are running out of time, so please limit your answer to 1 minute. My first question is to Professor Kretz. In your presentation, which considers your cognitive engagement in improving accessibility, is a novel and essential study, I think. In fact, the existing technologies do not seem to directly assess users' cognitive participation in real time. So recently, there have been numerous attempts to collect and utilize biometric information through technologies such as wearable devices, IoT, or artificial intelligence. So my question is there a chance to have the real real-time measurement of biomarkers on your users' cognitive engagement to enhance and personalize web accessibility?
Thank you. Thank you very much for this question. Um, my point of view is that it's not a question about whether there is a chance of doing this. I think the question is when to do it and how quickly we can achieve it. I would say, I'm sorry for this trivial answer. Why not? Why not doing this? We have this technology in cars, advanced driver assistive systems already doing this. They can track your eyes, they can track your attention on the road, they can help you to stay in line, they can help you to keep focused and awake when you're driving. The same type of the systems might be implemented or should be even implemented in digital media, especially in the citiverse, where in this technology already existing, we can have access to all these psychophysiological measures from the user, and that will not only serve the accessibility, but it also can serve the personalization of accessibility features, because everyone might need a different level of accessibility at a different certain moment in time in his or her life. So why not? We in a team, we are fighting to start these projects, and welcome everyone to join. But I know there are other great teams working on this as well.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
Christoph. And my next question goes to Paula. So no good system or framework can be run well alone or by just one person. And I think you have made a good point that areas of accessibility and inclusion involves many stakeholders, and it's essential to solve problems through their collaboration. And there are many attempts being made here and there to realize the future value of the metaverse or cityverse. In your presentation, you outlined the stakeholders involved in securing the accessibility and inclusion of cityverse. So who are the key players building the metaverse today, and what impacts are they having on economic growth and human capital?
Young, you're giving me a good question that we have worked on together. So thank you for that. I think all the stakeholders, the category of the stakeholders, I mentioned them. But what is extremely important to remember is now we are 2025. If a few years ago people were not in the field of AI, I'm an AI optimist. And the metaverse go end-to-end, multiverse and virtual world, and the access to the cityverse with the growth of AI. Also echoing what Sarah has mentioned, being very responsible because there is an energy going into it. But we should be aware that even on a conservative idea of the metaverse, multiverse, virtual world, we are looking at $3 to $5 trillion. And the more, I will say, liberal estimate is close to $10 trillion. So that's something that will shift the economic world without any question, as well as access to the workforce around the world. Bearing in mind that, for example, and I will just, saying that the demographic accessing the virtual world will be close to low estimate 1.5 billion to 3 billion in the next 5 years, with a penetration rate of 40%, which is not a minimum penetration of people accessing it. So the growth, I think, is only limited by what we think today. And I'm sure by tomorrow we will revise it. But echoing also what we have worked on, the necessity of collaborating is, for example, you being in Korea, me being in the United States, having people on our team being like Pilar in Spain or Sarah. All of that is necessary because this is the only way that even within our own stakeholder group, we have interconnection with other group, and that we can bring those message and breaking down the silo.
Thanks, Paula. And my next question is for Sarah. When it comes to emerging technologies, while the development and advancement of the technology itself is significant, it is also essential to consider the social impacts that this technology will bring, especially in issues such as sustainability, inclusion, and accessibility that we've been talking about. So beyond the critical goal of building a metaverse that overcomes offline challenges for persons with disabilities, as you addressed in your presentation, what other elements should we consider when designing the metaverse or using technologies like artificial intelligence?
Thank you so much for the question. I think there are a lot of things to consider, not just around accessibility and sustainability, but we also need to think about things now like privacy and data security, making sure that our data, understanding how user data is collected, stored, and used within AI, also the metaverse, is really important, and making sure that there are safeguards there to protect people's data. Another really important point that is worth raising is the issue of bias and AI. So I'm working on a project now all around AI and bias called the Alfie Project, and we're looking into how we can build AI models that mitigate against bias, because of course these AI models are trained on data, and depending on the data that is fed to them, they could perpetuate biases that we already see in the real world and actually amplify them. So I think those two aspects are very important. And in terms of individuals interacting in virtual environments, I would say things like content moderation is very important, and making sure that there's guidelines around and mechanisms for content moderation. I know that there was some work in that within the focus group in the metaverse, and also things linked to that then around digital well-being and mental health. So those would be the kind of the top ones for me.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so we're running out of time. So to preserve enough time for the next session, I don't think we have enough time to take any additional questions due to the time constraint. However, I hope each speaker could answer individually through the Zoom Q&A function. So I hope you understand that. Thank you all our speakers for their excellent presentation and thought-provoking responses. And I would also like to thank our audience for their attention and engagement. With that, I now give the floor back to Ini. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers in session 1 for your valuable insights, and a special thanks to Dr. Lee for moderating the discussion and guiding us through such a rich and engaging session. We now turn to session 2. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this session, Professor Pilar Orero, a global leader in accessibility and inclusion. She also leads the Digital Inclusion and Accessibility track under the Global Initiative on Virtual Worlds and AI. Pilar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Yini. I am very pleased to moderate this second session, Technologies to Break Communication and Interaction Barriers to Access Virtual Worlds. I am leading the Digital Inclusion and Accessibility track, that's track number 3 of Global Initiative on Virtual Worlds and AI. And I'm very, very proud to see this moment of reflection and progress. The goal of our track has always been to ensure that inclusion is not an afterthought, but an integral part of building the citiverse, this native accessibility, this native metaverse. It is one that empowers everyone to participate fully in virtual worlds. In this session, we will hear from 3 brilliant contributors whose work is helping reimagine what accessibility can look like in emerging virtual environments. They'll explore a range of technical and conceptual tools that are already shaping the way people interact across barriers. be linguistic, physical, sensory, or cognitive. Let me take a second to very fastly introduce our speakers. First of all is Carlos Duarte. He's a professor at the Universidade de Lisboa in Portugal, and he leads the Inclusive Human-Computer Interaction Research Line. And his primary research focus revolves around digital accessibility. Then is Chris Hughes at Salford University, and he brings an extensive experience in immersive technologies and their impact on health, well-being, and inclusive innovation. And then we have Punit Jain from Concordia University, but also from Switzerland, from the Polytechnic in Zurich. And his research lies in the intersection of human-computer interaction, extended reality, artificial intelligence, and disability studies. Each of our speakers will now share their perspective in a bit less than 15 minutes, please. And first of all, I welcome Carlos Duarte. Please, Carlos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pilar, for the introduction. And hello, everyone. Let me start sharing my screen. Okay, so I wish everyone a great Global Accessibility Awareness Day. It's brilliant to be here with my esteemed panel colleagues and all of you. Great to see so many people attending this session. And in this presentation, I will try to do a bit of what Paola said in the first session, and look at or try to sketch an evidence-based, while still speculative, roadmap towards native accessibility in virtual worlds, which we definitely need. And here by native, I mean that inclusion is wired into the engines that power these virtual worlds, and also the standards that we use to develop them, not as bolt-on widgets or after-the-fact captions and all the mistakes that we did with the web 30 years ago. And virtual worlds and metaverse, citiverse, whatever, all of them promise rich social and sensory experiences, but they need to be inclusive from the ground up. Native accessibility by design means building virtual environments that anyone can communicate and interact in, regardless of their ability. And today's VR and AR systems have very limited built-in accessibility support, I would say. So researchers, many of my colleagues are working on this, exploring cross-disciplinary innovations from artificial intelligence, extended reality hardware, neurotechnology, human-computer interaction research, all of this to break down communication and interaction barriers. So in the following, I will highlight some speculative or emerging tools that could shape the future of inclusive virtual environments. And these early stage ideas will span multiple disability domains, which illustrates how academic research could lead to practical applications. And I will also, for each of these, pose some open research questions and challenges for each area so that we can basically start discussing these topics. And before I continue, I have to stress that this presentation rests on 4 non-negotiable principles. First, it must be multimodal by default. So every event in a scene, a doorbell, a haptic knock, a subtitle, should manifest in at least 2 channels. So no single sense is a single point of failure. Second, real-time personalization. A platform must learn and store a user's preferred font size, contrast, reading speed, cognitive load, whatever, then reapply those settings the moment the user joins a new world. Third, interoperability. A caption track created in Unity should render identically in Unreal or Babylon.js. A haptic tecton for a fire hazard signal must feel the same across different gloves. So this is a standards problem, not a hardware problem. And the fourth one, user in the loop. So people who depend on accessibility features must go own the backlog, the test builds, and sign off on releases. Without this, very well-meaning engineers will over-engineer solutions nobody actually wants. So keep these four lenses in mind as we go through each of the technological domains. And I will start with communication first. And here AI can become a key enabler for communication in virtual worlds, bridging gaps in language, speech, and sensory modalities. Advances in speech recognition have enabled live subtitles for virtual meetings or multiplayer games, which benefit deaf and hard of hearing users. And researchers have already proposed AR, VR caption systems that overlay transcriptions in the user's field of view unobtrusively. So I think in the short term, we can expect to have virtual world platforms with built-in captioning engines that transcribe voice chats or environmental sounds into text or symbols by default. Also, to support sign language users in VR, academic groups, researchers have explored virtual sign language interpreters. For example, one concept augments VR lectures with a signing avatar for deaf students. Others have worked on translating text to signing avatars in a standardized way. Other prototypes recognize the user's sign language gestures in VR and provides feedback for learning, suggesting that the possibility of controlling games via sign input is not that far. So in the future, I think we can expect to have AI-driven avatars automatically appearing and translating between spoken dialogue and sign language in real time, serving as any user personal interpreter in any virtual world. But communication barriers are not only about disability. Language differences can also isolate participants. So emerging AI models can translate across numerous spoken languages and even generate speech in a user's own voice. So a speculative extension would integrate these models into virtual spaces, allowing people who speak different languages to converse fluidly via auto-translated voice or text. And in combination with sign language AI, a conversation in VR could be translated simultaneously into another spoken language and into sign language for those who need it. Also, AI can tailor content to individual needs. So an AI agent might automatically simplify complex interface text, rephrase idioms into plain language for someone with cognitive impairments. So this points to intelligent tutors or assistants in virtual worlds that observe user behavior and provide help explanations or training tips. So, of course, all of this has so many open research questions and challenges. So how can we ensure the accuracy and cultural sensitivity of AI translations? What standards are needed so that captions, sign avatars, and translations are interoperable across platforms? How do we design AI systems that help without infringing on privacy or autonomy? So these are just some examples. And also, how do we handle errors or misinterpretations by AI that could, for example, result in an incorrect sign translation so that communication is not broken? So all of this needs to be thought in the near future. So second, I want to talk about perception. And here, inclusive virtual worlds will go beyond vision and hearing. They will leverage touch and other senses to convey information. And so researchers are already prototyping haptic and multisensory interfaces that substitute or augment sensory channels. So there's been early research that proposed haptic gloves for VR, and this has happened decades ago. And now we have lightweight gloves that can let users feel virtual objects. So this has been shown to help blind users perceive object shapes in VR. We can think of wearable haptic suits that provide vibrations corresponding to events in the virtual world, like an object bumping into you. And so this can translate visual information into tactile cues for those who cannot see. For users who are deaf or hard of hearing, research and game design are already showing how to convey critical audio information through other channels. One example is providing a visual indicator for sound sources, for example, a flash or an icon showing the direction of a noise. There are examples on current products and VR game Persistence. An on-screen arrow indicates where enemies are coming from, which substitutes directional audio cues for people who cannot hear. Other game called Moss has integrated sign language. So a character animates hints in American Sign Language, which is a parallel medium to spoken hints. So this research into sound design and sonification of interfaces is creating rich audio-only experience so that sounds can convey distance, direction, urgency, all on their own. And we can hope that virtual world platforms will adopt this. Other sensory channels are also being explored. Prototype named Ear VR used small vibrotactile actuators around the ears to help deaf users perceive sound information in VR. And we have olfactory or thermal feedback devices that can add additional layers of immersion or cues. So imagine if you could feel the warmth when approaching a virtual fire, which would also benefit someone that doesn't see the fire. So this is still highly experimental, but they definitely can expand the design space for inclusive feedback. And of course, we have challenges to address. How can we manage sensory overload when combining multiple feedback modalities? What are the comfort and safety concerns? We don't know if long-term use of haptic feedback might cause fatigue or dizziness. There are several studies already trying to address this. There are also practical challenges. Many haptic devices are definitely expensive or cumbersome to use. So how will we make this technology affordable and ergonomic for everyday users? And how do we address this from a standardization perspective? We will need common vocabularies of haptic signals or visual alerts so that the user can receive consistent cues across different virtual experiences. So this will also benefit a lot from cross-disciplinary collaboration to address these questions. Okay, next, interaction flexibility. And so here, standard VR interactions like handheld controllers can pose barriers, especially for users with limited mobility or motor control issues, or those that really just want to interact differently. So here we also have a lot of research going on for users who cannot use handheld controllers. Interfaces that use eye gaze, head movements, voice commands, they can be transformative. So eye tracking is now built into some VR headsets. So gaze-based pointing and selection is already enabled, and studies have already found it to be simpler and more intuitive for certain users. Head tracking can also replace handheld input. There's already a game called Arcus Path VR, which is designed for head tilt to control a rolling ball. So you can play it without any controllers. So this benefits not only people with motor impairments, but also anyone who might want a more relaxed and hands-free experience. Also, we're working on wearables that capture other signals. We can have VR headsets that read subtle facial muscle movements and eye motions and make this work as control inputs, and they can be useful to navigate an interface. Electromyography sensors can also detect muscle signals to control an avatar or selection choices in your interface. So this is something that it's also already being addressed. And also another exciting direction of research are interfaces that automatically adapt to the user's needs and preferences. And this can be as simple as providing configurable settings, so a seated mode for wheelchair users that makes it easier to explore 360 degrees virtual spaces without having to physically spin around their chair. Reach assist to extend the user's virtual hand distance. So someone that is playing seated or interacting in a virtual world seated can grab out of reach objects. And so there are already games and products exploring this. And I'm trying to speed up my presentation. Also, and yeah, perhaps I will move on to some of the challenges here. And I think one of the major challenge will be discoverability. So with so many possible input modes and settings, how do users know that what's available or what's best for them? So perhaps a VR system might automatically detect the user's needs, which also raises privacy issues, or the system could rely on comprehensive onboarding tutorials to make users aware of available options. Also, there's a risk of fragmentation. So if each application implements different accessibility options, then the user experience won't be consistent across platforms. So standards and guidelines, once again, are needed to align best practices. So the last technology that I wanted to address is neurotechnology. And so this is one of the most futuristic frontiers for inclusion. And basically, brain-computer interfaces have the potential to bypass traditional input and output channels, which would allow users to control or even experience virtual environments using neural signals. Uh, for individuals who cannot speak or gesture, a BCI, a brain computer interface, could serve as a communication lifeline. And remarkably, there's this study where researchers in 2023, so 2 years ago, demonstrated a brain implant that enabled a paralyzed woman to speak through a digital avatar complete with facial expressions. And the system decoded their brain signals into text at nearly 80 words per minute, which was vastly faster than our prior assistive device. And so this was a first instance of speech and expression directly synthesized from brain activity. And so as this matures, we can imagine VR avatars driven by our thoughts. And we've already have research exploring also the use of brain signals to navigate or interact with virtual environments. And also on the output side, neurotechnology can send information directly into the brain, not just read from the brain. So we have examples of systems that use cochlear implants or retinal implants to help people hear and see. And so we could speculatively feed virtual world data into such devices, making users experience them in a completely novel way. So perhaps this is PCI's neural interfaces. They pose the biggest ethical and technical challenges. So definitely the pressing question here is privacy and security. So brain data is highly personal, and so misuse or leaks can be catastrophic. How do we secure neural data? How we ensure it's used only to help users? And of course, also here, there's a need for standards and integrations. How will virtual worlds platforms support this kind of input and output? And so we might need new protocols so that a future VR headset with neural interface capabilities can plug and play across games and social worlds. So I want to end very quickly with this proposal of a roadmap. So achieving native accessibility by design will require not just inventing new tools, but baking inclusive principles into the very standards and engines of the metaverse. And so the academic research directions that I've touched today are and means that we still have a lot to explore, which is good because there's this active inquiry, and that's what we do. So going forward, we need to include developing open accessibility guidelines for virtual world developers. We'll need to foster cross-industry collaboration, and we need to continue to involve users with disabilities in the design and testing of these technologies. So by addressing all these challenges, I think we have the opportunity to ensure that the future of virtual interaction is one where everyone can equally participate, create, and connect. And I'm really sorry for going over time, Pilar, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Carlos. I think it was perhaps worth you going over time because the number of technologies and that you have presented are amazing, and also the solutions and the gaps. And so thank you very, very much. And also I understood everything. So thank you for explaining everything so well. Now I would like to introduce Chris. Chris, can you be a wee bit shorter, please? Thank you.
I certainly can. Let's jump in as quickly as we can. Let me just share my screen. Right, can someone confirm they can see my screen and my slides?
I can see your screen, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'll jump straight in. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me along today. It's actually an amazing group of speakers, and it's quite humbling to be part of this group. So I'm delighted to be here. I want to talk to you a little bit from a technologist perspective. So I'm a computer scientist at heart. I like to build things. I tend to be one of those people that will hack away till the early hours of the morning building prototypes and that kind of thing. And I think that makes for a really exciting kind of space to be in this world. It's also really interesting listening to the other speakers today, how things like artificial intelligence have become so relevant to this world, where as a computer scientist, I guess I was building basic artificial intelligence systems with neural networks 25 years ago. And it's really funny how it's finally become to a point where it's going to actually influence this world as well. So I'm really excited to be part of it. What I want to talk about really, and I'll try and be brief and keep it in the next 10 minutes or so, is a little bit about working with users, understanding how to build technologies. And I want to share some of my observations as a computer scientist and a technologist that's built things for users and wants to make technology accessible to everyone. And I think I love this quote. Those of you that know me probably see me use this quote all the time, but there was this quote floating around from Henry Ford that talked about building cars that if he had asked people what they wanted, they would have basically said faster horses, because they don't know what is available, what they can do, what is possible. And it's very sad that people keep pointing out that he never actually said this, even though it's one of my favorite quotes. So I think it frames very nicely what I want to say, really. I think fundamentally, my observations are that if you try and build a new technology, if you just go and ask people what they want or need, they don't know what they need unless you can show them, tell them, explain what the possibilities are and let them experience them. But this also takes me to the next point where actually, if you ask users how they're interacting and using the technology, they couldn't actually tell you what they've done with it either. And so we have to find clever ways to actually analyze user behaviors, interrogate people to find out exactly what they need, and provide them with prototypes so that they can actually experience things to make decisions. And fundamentally, what I'm interested in is how we break down those barriers, making virtual reality inclusive and the technology work for everyone. So I guess I'm going back to the beginning. This is several years ago where I first got involved in my background's computer graphics and virtual environments, and I'm interested in media and broadcast. So I got involved in a W3C community group, which was interested in making captions and subtitles work within 360-degree video. And my observations were, as joining someone new to that group, that what they were working in is Word. They were using a spreadsheet to try and work out exactly what they thought the solutions were. And they were sending this out to users to try and gather feedback to work out what should be implemented and what should become the standards. But my problem is I walked into this world looking at this list. It's words, they all interpreted differently. I couldn't tell you what any of them really meant. And so there was more confusion than there was actually reaching sensible solutions. So as a computer scientist, I like to build stuff, and pretty much overnight, using JavaScript and a web page, built a very simple implementation of everything that I thought they had on that sheet. It was built as a web page so they could send it around to everyone, easily distributable, and they could basically tell me that I'd interpreted things wrong, or they could understand what everything looked like, and it made a lot of sense. I thought I was doing some amazing work, and I really like the fact that we also find the whole time that as a technologist, we tend to think we've got the solutions, but quite a lot of the time, we're quite narrowly focused. We do need the users we need to understand the needs of the users in order to be able to provide the solution we're after. So we spent a lot of time building a web-based framework where we could render captions within a 360 video, and we could send it out to people to try it with different parameters and see what happens. And then I was working with a friend and colleague from Verizon Media who sent me a video and said, we really want to build a demo using this framework. And here's a screen capture from a 360 video. You're basically sat in the center seat on an aeroplane with two people at each side, and they're both talking at the same time. And we realized that actually none of the frameworks for subtitles or captions that we'd built ever enabled you to have more than one caption on the screen at once. And we realized quite quickly that we'd got it wrong and had to start again. So I guess it led us through many different kind of prototypes, and in my world, it all is about trying to build tools that enable people to try ideas. And I always come from the kind of background of I don't know the solution, but what I would like to do is kind of parameterize it as far as possible in order to let people play, let people find the solutions that work for them. But this leads me to the next kind of point that I want to make, that even if you can put a framework in front of someone and show them some options and let them play with it, and then send them a questionnaire to ask what they want, what they did with it, they don't actually know what they subconsciously were doing. And this takes me back to one of my favorite early BBC studies, where they basically generated a video clip where they had a set of captions, they had a set of graphics, and a newsreader that were talking about 3 different stories. And they did a questionnaire afterwards to ask the people that were using the subtitles, did you read the subtitles? Did you understand what the news article was about? And it was really interesting how many of the participants told us that this news article was about a plane crash, when actually the subtitles and captions were about a completely different story. So it was really interesting to perceive that although the users, the consumers, thought that they had been reading the subtitles, they were actually lip reading the presenter. They were looking at the graphics and they were using all these other things, but subconsciously they truly believed that they'd read that caption, and they read what was going on in the article. So this led me into a world where I met Krish, who you met earlier, and a few other people in this group. And we started talking about, well, how can we actually analyze what people do? Are they reading the captions? When do they find them? How do they interact with the scene? And we also realized at the time that a lot of the head-mounted display technologies that were coming along had rudimentary eye tracking technology built in. The idea was from the manufacturers that if you've got an avatar, they want to be able to map facial expressions, but as scientists and technologists, we can exploit that technology to turn it into a basic eye tracker. And so we started doing several studies where we actually analyzed what people were looking at, what they saw in the scene, how quickly they found the captions, were they able to read each word, and it gave us much more of an insight into how to build an environment and understand what the behaviors are of that users and what they were doing. And I guess this all led me towards a world of being interested in, well, how do you take this forwards and turn it into the cityverse? How do you understand things that are going on in the metaverse? Can we put captions in? We have a whole exciting world where we have AI, we have all the tools that can do real-time translation, we can do speech to text, we can come up with any number of ideas as to how to make virtual environments inclusive. And as again, a technologist, we wanted to build a very quick prototype to see what this might look like. I won't bore you with too many of the details, particularly in the interest of the time, but we ended up building effectively a simple VR environment. And again, it was built entirely as a web-based tool. I spend a lot of time building prototypes, and the hardest thing tends to be sometimes how you distribute that to users to actually experiment with it and try with it. And I find if you can just send someone a web link, it's a really quick and easy way to get people to use your tool and to give you feedback. And it also avoids a lot of the initial kind of complex setup problems that come along. And so we built this basic multi-user environment where all we did was took the webcams, we mapped them to a very simplistic avatar, and we used it was just one of the JavaScript libraries that let you do speech to text to see if you could use this as a very quick way to generate subtitles and be able to talk to people and have conversations. And so we're interested in what you can do next, I guess. We need to understand the user behaviors. We need to understand what the users do within this space, how that they can navigate the space, and how we can make it work for them. It wouldn't be me if I didn't use the next slide, which is one of my favorite examples, particularly as Pilar is moderating the session today. But I'm also a great fan of the fact that technologists, as I said earlier, get things wrong unless the users tell us what's wrong. And when we first built this, I basically, being a hacker and someone that was building a quick prototype, mapped the key T on the keyboard to turn text on and off. It hadn't ever occurred to me then that someone might use the keyboard to type in things. And actually, if you're pressing T and you take that out of the normal functionality, people find it very strange that they then can't type the T word, T letter when they're typing words. And so we learn a lot of lessons as we're going along. So really, I'm hoping that I've kept that almost to 10 minutes. But I'm very keen to kind of conclude with telling you that in my experience, user tests very much yield limited results unless you can put a working product in front of the user. If you just give them an Excel spreadsheet and ask which option they think's best, we've had very limited results with getting helpful things back. I've also learned through my time of building these prototypes that most technologies have a learning step. If you put a head-mounted display on a participant and they've never used virtual reality before, they're going to spend the first 20 minutes looking at the sky and around the world and exploring it, rather than focusing on the kind of experience or the thing you're asking them to look at. We also found very much that content is important. We did some early studies where the only 360 video we could get was based around, I think there was a religious storyline, and it was not of interest to a lot of the users that we were asking to evaluate this material with, and found very quickly that actually they disengaged from the user study because we hadn't catered to the kind of demographic and the content that they would be really interested with. As I tried to argue, I think a lot of users don't know what they do. We have to find ways to actually evaluate tools and make them work for everyone. I also believe a lot of cool ideas come from experiments. We mess around, we try the silly things, and sometimes someone says, actually, that's a really cool idea. And I'm very humble and remember that technologists often get things wrong. And we need to work with the users in order to find out what we've done wrong and make it work. And hopefully I didn't go too far over time, and I'm very happy to expand upon any of these things with anyone that's interested offline afterwards for the interest of time.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for this fantastic presentation, and also such not only humble but such an honest conclusions. Nice to hear them. Usually we don't get that. And finally, we have Panit. Panit, would you like to present, please? The floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes. So, hello everyone. I am Puneet Jain, and I'm very interested to be here today. And I'm presenting a case study, which is also my PhD research, which I'm doing at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada, and also Zurich University of the Arts in Switzerland, which is a joint PhD program. And today I'm going to present a case study of integrating mouth gestures in XR, which are the learnings of working with like disabled artists during my PhD research. And firstly, I would like to ask, like, why should we be interested in even oh, why should we be interested in art and in the first place in the cityverse? Like, well, firstly, like artistic works not only enable us to think about accessibility in a creative way, but also put our research forward in public through artistic exhibitions. In the recent years, we are witnessing a significant drop in the prices of the XR headsets. And this is making it affordable for consumers, developers, and artistic communities to engage with them. For example, many disabled artists have started exploring XR technologies for creative expression and to share disability cultures. But if you have worked with a VR headset before, you will notice that the current generation of XR technologies heavily demand hand-based gestures or demand you to hold handheld controllers to interact with these devices. This poses a significant barrier to people with sensory motor disabilities, such as disabled artists and activists, whom I'm sharing on the screen, who are also my friends, Eric DeRosie and Christian Bayerlein from Canada and Germany, respectively, who cannot use these handheld devices to operate these controllers or or even do like head movements to have a 360-degree point of view in VR. So it kind of constrains them to integrate XR technologies in their artistic practices. There exist a number of solutions for people who have limited upper body movements or people who are using wheelchairs, but there is no research or little research for people with severe motor disabilities, such as people who have almost no upper and lower body movements, like Eric and Christian. So today I'm going to share a case study which is centered on a recently exhibited XR artwork with Eric and Christian and me as the first author, Puneet. And I use this case study to highlight the accessibility issues we faced in the making of these XR technologies and what did we learn from working with these disabled communities who are artists and creators and makers themselves. Um, to provide some context, Eric DeRosier is a painter who is in his mid-50s and has muscular dystrophy. However, living with quadriplegia, he cannot use his hands and fingers to paint. But not able to paint using his hands doesn't restrict him. This is the environment when you visit him in his home environment. He uses a mouth controlled joystick, which enables him to use his chin, jaw, and lip movements to control a robotic arm in space. And he has attached a paintbrush to the jaws of the robotic arm. And if you can see here, he uses an intricate combination of mouth controlled gestures and to dip the brush into the paint and apply strokes to the canvas. And Eric has been doing this for many years now, and he uses like mouth movements to express his artistic creativity. And this is the result. I here shared like 4 of Eric's favorite painted paintings, and this clearly depicts his continuous passion to paint till date and how he has been using his mouth as an interface to continue his artistic creativity. And this is a similar case with Christian Bayerlein, who's another friend from Germany, who is a hacker and maker, and he lives with spinal muscular atrophy, and he has almost no upper and lower body movements. But Christian loves to travel in the world in his wheelchair, and he has also hacked, just like Eric, his joystick, which he controls by his mouth, to operate his wheelchair and travel around the world. He's been using a straw to kind of hack this joystick, and he just like pushes the straw to control the wheelchair and move around. And this kind of hacking and continuously changing their living environments is something what disability scholar Remy Orgo calls cryptastic hacking. It kind of draws on the long history of hacking and tinkering that has been performed by disabled people in their regular daily lives to navigate in an inaccessible world. So this kind of methodology puts disabled people as experts and designers of everyday life, and so that we can acknowledge the crypt skills and the resources that they already have in the environment. Uh, so when I met Christian and Eric, and I expressed my desire to create an XR artwork with them, they asked me, like, because they were using their mouth for so long to use their assistive technologies, they asked me, can I use my mouth to navigate in VR? So to create the mouth gesture interface, I'll share the design process that I went through with Eric and Christian, where we employed an iterative design approach informed by this principle of what I call cryptastic hacking. So I will now describe like two prototypes that we developed for Eric and Christian, which is a mouth controlled interface that enables them to navigate and interact in XR. So for prototype one, we did a very simple job. We used an open source machine learning libraries like MediaPipe, and then we tried to detect 478 facial coordinates on the face. But we didn't need these many coordinates. What we did is like we figured out the coordinates on the contours of the mouth, and then we asked Eric and Christian to open their mouth. And by opening the mouth, they could have a shift in the 360-degree point of view in VR. And this is like very beneficial for them because they cannot even rotate their heads to have a 360-degree point of view. Um, but we soon realized that when we have headsets on, most of these algorithms are not working because they're trying to detect the eyes. Uh, I- when I was on the team, I asked Eric and Christian to maybe we can use like some kind of occlusion-based algorithms which can still detect the mouth while we are wearing the headsets. But since I was working with Eric and Christian, who are artists, they suggested me a different approach. So they suggested me instead of going with some other solution, why not we paste some kind of face mask of like famous celebrities like Angelina Jolie on the headset, so it kind of juxtaposes Jolie's eyes with the mouth of Christian and Eric, which is not a very good hack, but like it still works. It's an imperfect, but it still works with respect to Eric and Christian to kind of enable them to use their mouth and then kind of navigate and move in VR. But while we were doing this, we also realized that there was another company called HTC Vive, which was kind of selling these lip and mouth trackers. But of course, this company was not selling it for accessibility concerns. What they were interested in was to kind of replicate mouth gestures in metaverse when people go into these platforms like VR chats, where they are embodied as avatars and they want to talk to each other. So while they want to talk to each other, they also want their avatars to mimic their mouth movements. But unfortunately, this device was obsolete. No one used it. But we, as a team who were interested to create an artwork, bought it. And when we opened the software development kit, we found that internally what the device was doing was kind of classifying these 37 mouth gestures, like open the mouth, moving the tongue out, puffing the cheeks. So we were thinking like, why can't we use these kind of mouth gestures to kind of instigate a movement in VR? For example, opening the mouth can enable Eric and Christian to move forward. Puffing the cheeks can help them to move left, anti-clockwise and clockwise and rotate in VR. So we started hacking this device, which is from another company, and tried to integrate with another company headset, which is Meta. So this is the artwork that we created with Eric and Christian. We created an gallery in which we put Eric's paintings, and then we asked people to only use their mouth to kind of navigate in this art gallery. So they would move their tongue out and they puff their cheeks to kind of rotate in these galleries. And then the next work was shown at this big media art festival called Ars Electronica in Linz, Austria, where the artwork was revolving around Christian and his act of drinking a cup of coffee. And why this is important is because it not only puts the device in a novel interface in public, but it also engages the public to use this kind of input modality to also be kind of empathetic towards these kind of communities. So people would open their mouth, and we also explored mixed reality in this. So people could open their mouth and they could see the physical environment um, while so there was a continuous shift between VR and mixed reality. So I'll just share the overall reflection and insights from this kind of case study. First is like drawing on the lived experiences of people with disabilities for design. For example, me being a non-disabled researcher, I thought like maybe we can use just like micro movements of fingers and hand gestures of Eric and Christian to help them navigate. But they being on the team and working closely with me, I figured that mouth gestures could be a better way of interacting in XR for them as compared to use of hand gestures. We also found that since they were always working closely, instead of going on to very sophisticated algorithms, sometimes imperfect and yet workable hacks can also work, such as like gimmicky putting like face mask on the headsets. While Eric and Christian both kind of share a similar disability on a pathological scale, but as you can see, Christian has a malocclusion of teeth. So some of the gestures that worked with Eric would not work with Christian. So having an interable team, by which I mean like having similar disabilities but unique experiences of artistic practices, but also how they navigate in their daily world, help us to kind of adapt these kind of algorithms for both of them during the creation of the artwork. So this is from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Puneet. We don't have any time for questions. I'm very sorry, we've eaten it all up. So I have to give the floor back to Yining. But before that, I would like to thank Cristina Boetti and her team, Yining and Chiara, for all the support that we had in this track 3 for digital inclusion and accessibility. Thank you, Yining, and thank you to Carlos, to Krish, and to Puneet. And I apologize for not having the time to ask you questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Pilar, for moderating the session and also leading the work of the digital inclusion and accessibility track. And thank you to all the speakers in session 2. As we come to the close of today's program, it's now my great pleasure to introduce the Counselor of Global Initiative on Virtual Worlds and AI, Ms. Christina Boetti, to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Hining. So, dear colleagues, today, as we celebrate the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, we are not simply acknowledging the importance of accessibility, we are declaring that inclusion must be the blueprint for everything we build in our digital future. As cities evolve through artificial intelligence, immersive technologies, and virtual spaces, we are confronted with a profound responsibility to ensure that the digital transformation uplifts everyone, everywhere. Because if we fail to design for inclusion from the beginning, we risk reinforcing the very inequalities we are trying to solve. The citiverse offers us really a great opportunity. Our shared vision for inclusive, immersive environments that can be and must be different. It must be a place where barriers are broken, not built. And this is exactly what we are striving for in the digital inclusion accessibility track of the global initiative on virtual worlds and AI discovering the citiverse. At the heart of this work, he's Professor Herrero, an IT champion whose leadership, wisdom, and unwavering commitment have shaped this track with purpose, clarity, and vision. I think that Pilar, on behalf really of all of us, thank you for guiding this global effort with such dedication and for reminding us that inclusion is not a technical detail, it is a human imperative. I'd like also to thank all speakers and moderators because I think that today's webinar has been truly enriching and I found it extremely inspiring. So Together with a global community of experts, we are developing normative frameworks and practical guidelines to ensure that Citiverse is inclusive by design, aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals, especially SDG 10 on reduced inequalities and SDG 11 on sustainable cities and communities. At the International Telecommunication Union, we know that the future we want must be built on the standards we create. And that's why ITT Study Group 20 is the lead study group for Citiverse standardization, is working to ensure that accessibility, interoperability, and trust are embedded into the very fabric of virtual urban environments. The standards matter because they define what it is possible and who gets to participate in that possibility. And as we look ahead, I would like really to warmly invite all of you to join us for the second UN Virtual Worlds Day, which will take place from 11 to 12 of June in Turin, in Italy. This event is co-organized by the ITU together with other 20 UN entities and will be a powerful opportunity to come together across sectors and regions to shape a future where technology reflects our highest values, equality, and dignity. So let us not build virtual worlds that replicate out barriers. Let us build a Citiverse that is truly for all, accessible, empowering, and just. Thank you very much to everyone. I think it was an amazing webinar. We had more than 130 participants and, extremely engaging. Once again, a big thanks to all speakers, moderators, and to all participants. The webinar is now concluded. Thank you. Thank you so much.